again.
He is an idea. And I use the word idea not to be disrespectful, but because that's the only way he can be categorized.
Now, that is not the only way he can be categorized.
No.
That involves a complete redefinition of everything Christians have always believed.
Yep.
You won't find anybody who had anything to do with Chalcedon, the Athanasian Creed, Ephesus, Nicaea, anything like that, ever identifying God as an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I introduced such a radical redefinition of the Mormon doctrine of God, a Mormon would be in a very good position to simply dismiss me and say, if you can't deal with what we really believe in, why are you even bothering with this? But
rightly so.
And rightly so. And yet, all the way through this half-hour video, he is going to come up with this idea that the Trinity is two ideas and one embodied person, as if that in some way, shape, or form represents what we believe, and it's not even close. And so my question is, why? He didn't do that when he was with us.
Yeah.
This must be does he really think that he has come up with a new methodology that no one has ever thought of before? Maybe no one's thought of it before because they realized how bad an idea it is.
Right, exactly. He seems confused, and I'm not sure how much of this we're going to play, but if you guys get a chance to hear it, he's confused about the distinction between an abstraction and something that's transcendental.
You want to? I think that's,
is that coming up
I
here?
think it is.
When you think of everything that governs humanity, we have what I like to call governing forces. Let's look at the way human beings are.
What I like to call that gets scary. You know, if he was a 59-year-old professor of philosophy with multiple books published, then maybe. But I'm sorry. Why in the world would I care about what he has come up with when he's already demonstrated he has no earthly idea?
In the last 3 minutes, he's already confused so many categories and had such a hard time thinking in different categories consistently and representing what others believe. It's hard to accept what you like to call something.
Humanity, we have what I like to call governing forces. Let's look at the way human beings are governed. We're governed by logic and emotion and hope and fear.
Wait a minute. Logic, emotion, hope, and fear. So these are things. So logic and fear
are put in the same
category.
Yeah.
And they're not.
Yeah, that's
by
right.
They're
They're
not.
The imagination. No. Exactly. Yeah, is that
Sorry,
me?
that was mine.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so and logic would be abstract thought, logical thinking, laws of logic, mathematics, abstractions. Those are abstractions, but it doesn't mean that they're meaningless.
No.
We would say that laws of logic reflect the thinking of God. They're not something above God that God has to sort of appeal to and stop and go, am I being consistent?
Right.
They're not above God. Just like good, like the standard of good isn't, like in Kwaku's thinking, the standard of good and evil is outside of God.
Yep.
It's very clear and makes sense to me that a man would think that.
Yep.
Now, from a Christian perspective, good is actually defined by God's own character. He's the standard of good. What he does is always good. Like when we say God is love. God is the standard of love. Love isn't something outside of God, some law he has to follow, like laws of logic. The standard of righteousness is outside of God. He's got to sort of say, now am I holding all this together? I better really try. That's one of the distinctions also between the Christian God and the Mormon God, is the Mormon God is bound and he's underneath these different categories and laws of logic, laws of thought, you could say, in many ways, good standards of good and righteousness. All those things are, and Kwaku admits it. These existed before our Heavenly Father.
Yep.
He's
going to say that.
He organizes them and sort of shapes them. It's like, so they're outside of God. He has to appeal to them. Those are the standards of good that I have to follow. They're outside of me. That's not the Christian God. God is good. By nature, his very character is a standard of all goodness. But all that to say, abstractions versus something that's transcendent. And an abstraction is like a law of logic. Now, just because you say it's an abstraction doesn't mean that it's not real, that it's just an idea. It's actually universal. It is immaterial, of course. It is unchanging, and that's because it reflects the very thinking of God. But when you think in an abstract category like a law of logic or laws of math, you can't just say it's just an idea. It's like, wait a second, the law of non-contradiction isn't just an idea, it's the law. And it's like gravity, right?
Exactly. And that's not fear.
Yeah.
He put that together with
He put an
fear.
emotional thing like fear in an abstract thought category like laws of logic.
So when you think about it, I can't violate the law of non-contradiction, but that's the same thing as my being afraid of heights.
Mm-hmm. He's
muddled thinking.
Very much so. And I think anybody who studies this area and thinks about what conversations have already taken place before Kwaku was born, Christian philosophers, atheistic philosophers have already had these long discussions and clarified categories in terms of when we talk about God as immaterial, we're talking about something that is transcendent, that is outside of a creaturely common experience of the material. He is transcendent. He's outside of common experience, but it doesn't mean that he's just an idea. He has real being, real existence. We're not talking about an abstraction like a law of logic. We're talking about a personal being, and we would use the terminology of transcendent, not abstraction. And I don't know of any philosopher that I can think of that would ever even use that category when they talk about God as an abstraction. God's merely an abstraction. The terminology is transcendent.
Right.
There's a distinction in category.
But there's no foundation for that within his worldview.
No.
So I mean that's why I've said we can have a meaningful discussion with a Muslim on these topics, but we encounter a huge chasm because the Muslim and the Christian are closer because they recognize these categories and work within these categories. Mormonism, when Joseph Smith we have imagined supposed that God is a God from all eternity, I will refute the idea and take away the veil so that you may see. Mm-hmm. He separated his followers from Christianity forever by a chasm that is massive.
Yeah.
And so they don't have a foundation within a worldview to even define transcendence, to even have such a... In fact, Mormonism, when you think about it, even though it talks about a spiritual preexistence, as he himself will say at some point, he says, but we believe that all spirits are just simply refined matter.
Yes.
These people are materialists to the max. Yes. They are materialists to the max, and their God is as well. Let me continue his while you're looking for
all this kind of stuff, right? These are emotions, and we also have our thoughts that govern us, right? They command and guide our choices and our reactions to things. Our thoughts and emotions don't exist outside of our being, right? They don't exist outside of us. These things are immaterial governing forces. Emotions and thoughts are immaterial too. They're not matter. In fact, you can't even prove that logic exists. You can only use logic to try to prove that other things exist. These things are abstractions. They're methods, right? They're not actual things. They're ideas. Every single immaterial governing force that exists is an idea. Every single one. And if you don't believe me, I want you to pause this video right now. Try to think of one immaterial governing force that is not an idea. You can't do it, can you? It's not possible, because every single immaterial governing force that exists is an idea.
So there you go. Everything is just to be thrown into talk about some type of minimalization.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where I really don't know where he's getting this.
I think the appropriate thing to do would be for Kwaku to simply say, do you guys believe what I just said? And for us to simply say, no, we don't believe that at all. And that's because you're confusing categories of thought of something that's an abstraction, again, versus when we talk about God as transcendent. And again, you made a good point. Now, I hope people catch this. When you talk about he's confusing it because of his perspective, his worldview, they're materialist to the core. He has a completely different perspective. He's not neutral here, that he's loading into this conversation. When we talk about God is spirit, God is spirit, we're thinking about that in a completely different category because of the biblical worldview that gives to us those definitions. What are we talking about when we say God is spirit? What do we talk about when we talk about ordinary human experience? This is where we're coming from. His perspective is starting from a completely different platform where he believes, again, this idea of spirit as outside of this experience, as transcending this experience. No, spirit is refined matter. It's like this perfect. So he doesn't have the category of thought that we have. That there is a substance, there is a nature, there is something that transcends this material experience that God has defined for us, that he gives us these categories to think in because he defines himself. He's revealed himself to us so that as his creatures, we're supposed to look at his revelation and say, okay, I understand the categories God's talking in now. He's talking about himself that is above our ways, higher than us, different than us. We're the creatures. This is our experience. He created this world out of nothing. And so we think in those categories because we're using the revelation of God as the category definer. He's thinking in Joseph Smith's categories, Mormonism's categories. So when he looks at someone saying, well, God is spirit, he goes, pish posh, spirit. What is spirit? An idea? And it's like, no, spirit's transcendent. It transcends normal, common, creaturely categories that we see as normal to us, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist because we say it is spirit.
In Isaiah 29, God says, you think the potter is like the clay.
Yeah.
And the Mormon says, exactly. And that's what Kwaku is going to say. You're going to, we'll play, where he literally says, this is the God we worship. He's created. He has a physical body. He's ruled by law. He's a man.
Yep.
That's the Mormon God.
He's being consistent there.
And the biblical God says, you're an idolater.
That's right.
Because I'm not like the clay. And the fundamental worldview assertion of Mormonism is, yes, you are.
Yeah.
That's where Mormonism is totally separated from us and will always be separated from us.
So God the Father, being an immaterial governing force, is just an idea. In the most honest look at mainline Christianity, God the Father is just an idea.
That's not an honest look at all. That is pure. Here, I had him out on the Michael Heiser stuff. So you need one of these.
I do need one.
You can't have this one. Sorry.
Okay.
But you can get your. But I don't know. It sort of looks like your hair.
It does a little bit. Yes.
But doesn't have a beard. Doesn't have a beard. We need to put a beard on it.
Well, mine will have a beard for sure.
Definitely. We need to. So somebody out there, start making Jeff his own
with a nice big beard.
Nice big beard. But he would burn easily, so you need to be very careful. Because I actually took the Bic in the other room because I have gotten it too close a few times. It's been a little bit scary. But this is a straw man misrepresentation of what Christians believe to say that God the Father is an idea. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's just be straightforward. I don't care what flowery terms is going to put upon it. This is a massive misrepresentation, and if Kwaku continues to use it without providing substantial documentation that he is seeking to accurately represent us, that's really
well. It's just, and think about the fallacious nature of it. If I say, I want everyone to think about a purple house, I want everyone to think about a pink cow, I want everyone to think about an ugly boy. Now, we could say those are ideas, right? But does it mean they don't exist? Like, people have painted cows pink for fun. There are purple houses and there are ugly boys.
Are you admitting to some things?
Yeah, right, exactly. People have done these things. I'm just a hypothetical.
I never did.
It's just a hypothetical, officer. It's just a hypothetical. But here's the thing. Just because you postulate something as an idea, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have existence. Right. And so if Christians are explaining God, and he says, that's just an idea, it's like, no, I'm explaining God. Just because I'm giving you a category of thought to think in, because something is an idea, doesn't mean that it doesn't have real existence. And so I think there's just major confusion on his part here. And I think it comes from this. He's a creature. He can't comprehend this God. No. He wants a God he can comprehend that's like him, that was once a man, who became an exalted man, and sits enthroned in yonder heavens. That is the great secret. I mean, think about what Joseph says here. I'll just say this quickly as possible. He says, most famous discourse, and Kwaku's being very consistent here. He says in the King Follett discourse, I will prove that the world is wrong by showing what God is. I'm going to inquire after God, for I want you all to know him and to be familiar with him. He says this, you will then know that I am his servant, for I speak as one having authority. I will go back to the beginning before the world was to show what kind of being God is. What sort of being was God in the beginning? He says God himself was once as we are now, and is an exalted man and sits enthroned in yonder heavens. That is the great secret. I say if you were to see him today, you would see him like a man, man in form like yourselves, in all the person, image, and very form of a man. And so when Joseph Smith is defining his God here the way that he is, he's giving to us an exalted man, someone from the very beginning who was a man, and that's where Kwaku is operating from. That's where his critique's coming from, is that he, as a creature, cannot comprehend our God. And to that we say, Kwaku, I totally get it. I totally get it. He is not that God is inapprehendable or understandable in terms of when God communicates, that it's confusion or illogical, but of course we grant that God is incomprehensible to a 3-pound brain and a creature like us. And I want to say this, he ought to be, considering the being that he is.
That's very uncomfortable, Jeff.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We want a comfortable religion. And that's what you're going to